Well, hi, we're here for the Disciple-Centered Catechism course, and we are in the middle of holy behavior. Last time we looked at the life cycle rituals, and today we're going to start the holy day rituals. It'll probably take us at least 2 episodes to do that, perhaps 3. And even that is just a immediate explanation without any detail. We talked about there being 2 kinds of rituals. The first kind of ritual is a rite of passage. Ritual is prescribed behavior. It tells you what to wear, it tells you what to say, it tells you what to do, it tells you how to act in such a way that you engage in a prescribed behavior that brings about an experience that is a common experience between those who are members of the community and the individual going through the ritual. And those rituals bring meaning into our psychological reality. The first kind of ritual that we looked at last time was the ritual of a rite of passage that moves you from one status to another. Baptism would fit that. Circumcision would fit that. Marriage would fit that category. Those things that move us from one status to another are usually done once because we generally go from one stage of the life cycle to another one and don't repeat those. Now, in cases of death and remarriage, those kinds of things, it may happen again. There are occasions where a person goes through baptism a second time, but that's not generally the case or the rule. The second type of ritual is called a rite of intensification. And a rite of intensification is done much more often. It's done it may be done frequently, could be done annually, it could be done quarterly, it could be done monthly, it could be done weekly. Those rituals reinforce meaning, and therefore they maintain this refreshing of the knowledge of what that meaning is about. So we're going to look at those through the holy days. The most common ones are the holy days. And we're going to look at those through the biblical holy days and the holy days that Judaism follows. Then next week I'm going to talk about, or the next episode, I'll talk about the Christian form of holy days. And then we will talk about the disciple center and how we combine the biblical and Jewish with the Christian ones because of their overlap and their connection. And so this will take us at least three sessions. Now, the primary understanding of the holy days comes from Leviticus chapter 23. In Leviticus chapter 23, the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, the Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations. My appointed times are these." And then the rest of the chapter expresses the basic foundational holy days that belong to God. They are God's. They're His appointed times. We all have our own, if you will, holy days. We have our birthday and we have our anniversaries. Those are our holy days that say something about our life. The holy days of God say something about who He is and what He is doing. They talk about the character of God and they talk about the purpose of God. And they are given to Israel, and by extension, not by replacement, by extension to Gentile believers who come to the God of Abraham, the God of Israel. They reinforce the understanding of who God is and what He is doing. And so these are very important. The first one that it talks about is the Sabbath. It says, "These are my appointed times. For 6 days work may be done, but on the 7th day there is a Sabbath of complete rest, a holy convocation. You shall not do any work. It is the Sabbath to the Lord in all your dwellings." Wherever you are, this Sabbath is in place. Now, what is the Sabbath? Well, we experience the Sabbath by the rituals of the Sabbath. And we don't have time to go into all of those, but I have written a text of Sabbath for Christians, and there are other books in Judaism and Christianity. The Sabbath has been primary to Judaism. And in Christianity, there is somewhat of a struggle between the Lord's Day, Sabbath day. We'll talk about that next week. But the Sabbath is foundational to all of the holy days, and there's a reason for that. Genesis chapter 1 tells the creation of God, and the Bible's chapters and verses are added later. And so, unfortunately, chapter 2 begins right at the culmination of chapter 1. Chapter 2 really says that God, as he was finishing these creation that he had done 6 days, the seventh day he rested and ceased from all his work, and he blessed the seventh day, and he hallowed it. He made it holy, made it kadosh. And in that sense, it becomes the first and primary of all the holy days. The Sabbath beginning at Friday night at sundown till Saturday at sundown is a 24-hour period, maybe a little longer the way it's observed, that causes an acknowledgement of who God is. When Israel and when a Gentile who observes the Sabbath goes through the Sabbath in both the rituals and the experience of that, they are entering into an understanding of the character and the activities of God. And so we see these in the 2 commandment structures, the giving of the 10 commandments found in Exodus chapter 20 and also found in Deuteronomy. Those 10 commandments or 10 sayings that are there, and they vary, as we've said, between exactly how you number them and where the break is, but I don't want to get into that now. The Sabbath is found in there. What's interesting is that the Sabbath is described slightly differently in Exodus than it is in Deuteronomy. In Exodus, it says that you will work 6 days and you will rest on the seventh day because God created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And so what we really have in this Sabbath is identification that God is creator. Now, the Jews are not allowed to have an image of God. So how do you show that your God is the God of creation? You do that by observing the Sabbath. He rested on the Sabbath. You rest on the Sabbath, and you acknowledge that you worship the God who created the heavens and the earth, as the scripture says in the beginning. In Deuteronomy, we get a slightly different explanation for the Sabbath. There they are told that they are to keep the Sabbath and not to work, the same basic commandment. However, this time it is to remind them that they were a slave in Egypt and that God has redeemed them. And so God is creator and God is redeemer. And because he is creator and redeemer, he has placed both of those statements about him in the Sabbath. And by entering into the Sabbath, behaving in accordance with the Sabbath, you acknowledge that God is creator and redeemer, first to Israel and to all mankind beyond that. So the Sabbath is foundational to all the other holy days. And that one is observed usually Friday night in the home. And then Jews will then go to the shul or the synagogue Shabbat morning, the next morning. And then back in the home, they will have a ceremony that ends the Sabbath, the Havdalah ceremony. So the entire Sabbath is focused on God as creator and as redeemer, creator of the world, redeemer of Israel and the whole world. What a beautiful statement that it is. And the ritual is wonderful, and I wish I had time to go through that. I'll do that in another video series, but for our purposes now, we're just trying to list the holy days. Now, after the Sabbath is established, then it says this: these are the appointed times of the Lord, holy convocations, which you shall proclaim at the time appointed for them. Now, what we have in the rest of the chapter are 2 sets of holy days, one set in the spring, one set in the fall, and those holy days establish the holy calendar or the religious year of Judaism. Now, these first 3 are found in the spring, and they are the Passover related holy days. And I want to briefly talk about them, and then I want to talk about the other ones. I just don't have time to go into all the detail I'd like. In the spring, the first holy day is Pesach, Passover, the 14th day of the month. And this is a reminder of when God redeemed Israel out of Egypt, and he brought them out through the blood of the Passover lamb. He gave them this meal to eat. They were to eat unleavened bread. They were to eat bitter herbs. They were to eat a lamb, and the lamb was to be eaten with the bitter herbs and with the matzah, and the blood of that lamb was to be put on the doorposts and the lintels. And God said, when I see the blood, I will pass over. I will not put the plagues that I'm putting on Egypt on you. I'm killing their firstborn. I will not kill yours. And so God said, you will do this every year. On this date, you will have a meal. You will eat bitter herbs. You will eat the lamb. You will eat the matzah. And you will, when your son asks you, why are we doing this? You will tell him. And so the ritual of Passover, the Haggadah, is the story of the telling of God's deliverance of Israel out of Egypt as he had promised Abraham, and a re-experiencing by the way they dress and by the way they eat, and what they say, and the questions of the children, to reenact and remember and to, in a sense, experience again the Passover deliverance of Israel. Now, starting then for 7 days, the second part of this is 7 days of unleavened bread. They were to eat unleavened bread. They're to avoid leaven. And leaven has this symbolism really of that which puffs up and goes your own way and not the way of the Lord. And this being unleavened bread and eating the unleavened bread is to remind Israel that they were selected by God. They are holy unto the Lord. And therefore they're not to be in the world and of the world. They're to be distinct from that, for they are going to be a light to the nations. And so they have to maintain their sole pure purpose of being the people of God. Now, in this same week, there is a day called First Fruits. And First Fruits, they would go out and take a sheaf and wave that first fruits before the Lord and begin a counting of 7 complete Sabbaths and then 1 day. This counting of the Omer that goes from the time of Passover, unleavened bread begins, first fruits, and then the counting of the 50 days to Shavuot, which is Pentecost, 50 days. And that time is where Moses had gone up into the Mount Sinai. They had traveled for 10 days. He went up for 40 days. He comes down on that 50th day with the tablets of the commandments of the law. So God has redeemed Israel by the Passover lamb. He has called them to be a holy people to himself, and he makes a covenant with them at Sinai with his laws. I'm giving you my laws. I'm giving you my commandments. You put them on your heart. You put them in your mind. You put them as frontals on your eyes, and you'll put them on your hands. You will do them. You will teach them diligently to my children. And so all of that is wrapped up in the rituals and the observance of the holy days of Passover, unleavened bread, the counting of the Omer, and Shavuot. Now, there's much more to it. I'm just trying to give you a basic handle on that. Now, in the fall, there are another series of holy days that really begin something that looks back but also looks forward in that sense, and those are the high holy days. The high holy days begin with the beginning of the month, and the beginning of that 7th month is called Yom Torah. Now today it's called Rosh Hashanah, and head of the year, because it's about the year of Jubilee and about the civil year. Don't have time to talk about that now. But its biblical name is Yom Torah, the sounding of the shofar that is sounded in a specific way, and it reminds them that they are to return to God. It reminds them that they are to remember the great acts of God, and it reminds them that ultimately God is going to raise the dead and establish the kingdom, and he's going to make a judgment. And therefore, these days of awe that begin with that day is a time for reflection, rethinking what you've been doing, straightening out relationships, making good on things you've done, stimulating one another to good works, and awaiting the life to come and the next year's life as well. At the end of those 10 days of awe, on the 10th of the month, is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur is the highest holy day in Judaism. And interestingly enough, while there are rituals now that are done in the synagogue as people do that, and they're beautiful rituals, at the time of the temple or the tabernacle, what people were to do was fast and afflict their souls. And the affliction of the soul was what they did, but the priest, the high priest particularly, was going to make atonement. He was going to make atonement first for himself because he was a sinner. Then he would make atonement for all Israel through two goats, one that was for the Lord and one that was for Azazel. And again, I don't have time to talk about those in detail now. Just want you to know what the holy days are. So the Day of Atonement is a day when God provides forgiveness and atonement, and in a sense, judgment for his people and for all people ultimately. And that atonement then is a day when they must afflict themselves, because as they afflict themselves and fast and deny themselves, they are humbling themselves towards God, and God will provide the atonement. Now, 5 days after the Day of Atonement is Sukkot. And Sukkot, Festival of Booths, God says to them, I want you to build a hut, a booth, and I want you to live in it for 7 days. And living in it for these 7 days will remind you of when I dwelt with you in the wilderness. I took care of you. Your shoes didn't wear out. I gave you manna to eat. I provided for you. So you will decorate this booth with fruit that anticipates the promised land and the kingdom to come and all the good things that I promised. And you'll remember that I dwelt with you before, and you'll look forward to when we will dwell together in the way that I have promised. And what a great celebration that is for 7 days in there. So we have Yom Teruah, the blowing of the shofar, calling back to God. We have the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, which is where God provides judgment and mercy and grace and atonement for sins. And then we have the anticipation of the kingdom to come through the dwelling in booths. Now, these holy days establish the beginning of all the holy days for Judaism and to some extent for Christianity. But there are more holidays, and I just don't have time to talk about them. For example, Hanukkah, Purim, that is found in the scriptures. There's a Holocaust Memorial Day. There are a number of days. The destruction of the temple is a holy day and set aside. Israel uses the holy days to reinforce meaning, and so the rituals and the guidance that is done in that behavior, both in the home and in the synagogue, is done to remind them of the meaning of what God is doing. They are the people of God. He is their God. They are his people, and he is working out his purpose through them. And that purpose includes we Gentiles from the nations who have come to the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now, next week, what I want to do is I want to talk about the holy days within the Christian church. These holy days are focused more on the life and ministry of Jesus, but they hinge onto the Jewish and biblical holy days. And in a sense, they can't be fully understood without the foundation of the biblical holy days. And then after that, we'll take a look at how we try to put those hinges together at the Disciple Center. So that's our episode for this week. I hope that's been helpful for you. You can certainly get much more information at our website, disciplecenter.com. And if you look at the religious calendars, it gives a fuller explanation of all the holy days in Judaism, Christianity, and how we observe them at the Disciple Center. So until next week, I'll say God bless you.